Hey folks, I'm Juan Castaneda. I'm the creative director behind SOPA, which is a beautiful narrative experience about the things we pass along. My background is as an animator, a 3D animator, and then I also worked for many years as a technical director on different kinds of projects from music videos to film to games.
Right off the bat, like looking at this game, it seems deeply personal. Like it seems like a kind of story that comes straight from the heart. And I'm just like kind of curious, like how did you begin to assemble this story? Like what were the inspirations for it?
It is, I think, a very personal story, and I'm glad that that's coming through. The story is really based around our experiences growing up in Latin America. I come from a big family. I co-wrote the game along with my cousin, who's the gameplay lead on SOPA, and we collected a lot of our family stories. Some of them are more changed than others, but we tried to capture basically the feel of growing up in Latin America in the 90s. Everything from like the lighting to the grandma's house, which is inspired by my grandma's house somewhere in like the mountains of Colombia. A lot of people have said that the little boy Mijo looks a lot like me, but we've really tried to give it that personal touch to capture that feeling.
Speaking of colors, like this game is like it's vibrant, it's very pretty, and like there's definitely an aesthetic here. How difficult was it to like sort of come up with the visual sort of theming of what you wanted here and put it together to kind of make the tapestry that tells this narrative?
So it was definitely a search. I think a big part of the core art style is just my own personal art style that I've evolved over the years. But we were trying to first make it look and feel very Latin American, which is something that we hadn't seen a lot in games. And what's interesting is I think people have this association of what Latin America is supposed to look like, and that's built around the aesthetics of certain specific countries. But some countries like Colombia have an aesthetic that is a little bit more subdued in terms of certain things or the usage of certain colors. So a lot of it was looking at what we have around us here, but also deliberately trying to like play down things that could be interpreted as being from other countries that are a little bit more representative, more commonly represented in media. I think a big part of it is the lighting. So just capturing that particular type of feel of like a hot day, um, and of the air not moving around too much. A lot of the work was trying to capture that feel of these places in Latin America, of our hometown essentially on a hot day. And so a lot of it is that the beam of light coming in through the window, the air being kind of still, these sorts of little dust particles floating around in the air, that light beam next to the window, and just the particular kinds of colors that you get, because it's not exactly the same as a golden hour, like in the northern hemisphere. It's a lot more of like it feels like more of a whiter light that's gonna burn out the highlights a little bit. And so trying to capture that color and that mood and that feel was really important to us because it's about the experience of being there, and showing a little bit of that stillness, and it makes it feel like you've been there longer than you actually have. That all plays into the vibe of being in these places, and so it was really important for us to capture that.
And there's a really kind of funny vibe in some of the imagery that we see, like even in just some of the trailers for this game, like I assume it's a coyote.
So it's a culpeo fox,
Ah,
from far down in South America. Yeah.
the reptiles playing a card game, just like there's all sorts of fun stuff in here, and like I'm curious, like does some of this come from folklore? Does some of this come from just like stories? Like how did you decide like how the more supernatural elements of SOPA?
So it's definitely a mix. We did try to make it so that most of the animals that you see in the game are animals that you find in the regions of South America. So, for example, from the frogs to the fox, it is a particular type of fox. It's if, in the far south. We even have a character that's a harp eagle, which, funnily enough, one person recognized on Twitter as being that exact species of eagle, which we thought was really cool. as far as some of the goofier things that they do, it's a mix of playing on the idea of tall tales, or what we call in Latin America magical realism, specifically in Colombia. And so it's this sort of place where it works as a tall tale, where you hear this sort of story that's just pushed enough, or just extraordinary enough for you to doubt whether it's real or not. And so we took that as a starting point and then we ran with it. So it was sort of like, well, how would you exaggerate, frogs being really large, maybe these frogs, maybe people say in the town that these frogs used to be so big around town that it felt as though they were eating potatoes, and you sort of play on it in that direction of like, what would big frogs do, what would frogs behave like if they were just like normal people living in their normal like frog town. And we sort of just run with that idea and keep adding things to it and adding things to it and adding things to it. Like when you're having a conversation with a close friend and you're just kind of adding to somebody else's joke, and then it just takes on a life of its own.
It's also really cool that like some players have already sort of like from those regions have seen what you're putting in the game and can kind of identify with like some of the imagery, some of the animals, some of the stories. It's really interesting to see like that when like the culture itself recognizes what it's seeing in the art of others. It's so cool to see that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the things that we're the most proud of, to be honest, because we're making this kind of weird project. It was definitely a leap of faith to jump into making SOPA, because it is such a different and unique thing, and it is so cultural. Um, the ambience around it and everything in the story. So that has been absolutely rewarding. So we had a really nice experience recently. We're at a showcase. A player who wasn't from my own country, he was from a different country in Latin America. He just saw the game in the background. He was like, "Oh my God, that's like my grandmother's house." And he was excitedly telling his friend, "That's my grandmother's house." And then he sort of flipped the character around and he grabbed the control. And he was like, "Oh my God, that looks just like me. That's me." And then he ran through the hallway into the kitchen. He's like, "Oh my God, that's exactly my grandma's kitchen." And then he saw the silhouette of the grandma of Nana in the background. He's like, "Oh my God, that's my Nana." And he walked up to the interaction icon and he saw the name pop up, Nana. And he was like, "Oh my God, her name is actually Nana. This is amazing." And then he just turned and started talking to me and thanking me for making this kind of experience. And what's been really beautiful is that that it's been folks that are from countries that are even far away from our own country, that have had radically different experiences growing up, folks that are also like second or third generation, coming from Latin American families that move to different places, and they connect with it too, and they connect with the food aspect, and they connect with the look, and they get it right away. And what's interesting too is, starting from Latin America, we've also met people from regions that are even farther away. We've talked to people from the Philippines, from countries in the Middle East, that have said, "Wow, that feels just like my grandma's kitchen. That yard feels just like my yard back home. That house feels just like my house." So all of that has been super, super rewarding.
This is a game like people can play the game, and it does look like it's going to be just like as varied as the imagery, as varied as the narrative and story are. It kind of looks like the gameplay itself is also going to be just as varied. And like, how did you come up with the interactive elements, and what the player was going to do, and how they were going to advance this story?
So the gameplay is very varied, and we approached the gameplay as designed to support the story. The core thing about the game for us is that narrative experience. So what we wanted to do was have people feel rather than just see what happens in that story. And so all of the elements are built around that. So, for example, when we have say button mash events or quick time events, rather than it just being like, oh, you're lifting something heavy like in most games, or just like throwing punches. Here we wanted it to be very contextual. So here you're button mashing to like build up the courage to stretch out your hand, your shaking hand, to a scary dog, and have your dog sniff your hand. So it's contextual in the sense that if you stop button mashing, you give into your own instinct, which is to pull your hand back. And as you're button mashing, it's causing your hand to shake. So you're kind of doing it despite your own inclination. We have sections where there's a lot of dialogue and getting to know different characters, because getting to know that world and getting to know the traditions in that world are really what's core to that story and that experience of being there in that place. We have stuff like, sailing down river rapids and avoiding rocks there, and that's all again coming from the story of how do we get to this place in an interesting way, but also what are these real places that exist that are relevant to the story. So my family was all born in this small house in this mountainous region, and their house was next to this river, and so we grew up listening to stories of them playing the river, of women washing the clothes by the river. And then, of course, as we grew up, we would constantly go down to the river and either swim in the river or raft down the river. So those are all the experiences that we wanted to very tangibly bring into the game. You'll find that the gameplay is quite bespoke to anything that's happening story-wise, and we like keeping the game fresh in that way, where it's always changing.
When players experience them, what's the biggest thing that you want them to get out of it as its creator?
I think we'd like people to feel warmth and for people to feel appreciative of their families. I think nowadays it's really easy to take things for granted, and you get caught up in your day to day, your work, or whatever it is that you're doing. It's just so easy to forget, so easy to talk to your mom and have her say lovely things and kind of discount it as, oh, you're just saying that because you're my mom. But what we wanted to do was really focus in on that and remind you of how valuable that is, and how quickly that goes by, how quickly life goes by. And I think those are the central themes of the game.
Where can folks find out more about the game? Where can they follow it and learn more about like what's happening with it and when it's coming?
So the game's already up on Steam. You can wishlist the game on Steam to follow all the latest updates. That's probably the best place. And then you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram and now on TikTok, and all the social media things that all the kids are doing these days at StudioBando.